The rake is a creature that, although it originated as an internet creepypasta, seems to echo a series of apparently unrelated accounts of beings science has yet to classify. Its description does not match other figures from traditional folklore, though some have suggested a connection to the chupacabras well known in Argentina. The rake is believed to have a humanoid appearance, unusually tall and extremely thin. Throughout its history, it has gained notoriety for its hostile behavior toward humans, though its actions appear to lack any clear purpose. Most of its attacks are not physical but psychological, instilling overwhelming terror through a variety of methods. There are several theories about its origin. Some point to internet threads and online discussions. Others believe the idea may have sprung from hallucinations suffered by certain individuals experiencing alcohol-induced psychosis, which could explain the absence of physical harm in those who claim to have survived its encounter. The rake has also been linked to other figures, such as Slenderman, whose origins I covered in a separate video. Slender Man was inspired by old folk stories that describe an unnaturally tall and thin man who roams mysteriously through the woods. Some theorize that the rake could be a messenger of Slender Man, or perhaps a far more twisted variation, corrupted by animal-like afflictions that distinguish it from the man in the suit. Although public documentation is scarce, legend has it within the well-known world of lost media that in 2008, there was a YouTube channel that released a recording of the rake. The brutality of the footage and the consequences it had on its viewers allegedly sparked the platform's first major video purge and the earliest restrictions on content. Still, it is said that if you search for the rake caught on tape, you might stumble across, deep in the corners of the internet, on loosely moderated forums or within certain Telegram groups, a half-hour-long video showing this creature merging the bodies of two Middle Eastern men. Regarding the appearance of the rake, the creature is often described as resembling what one might imagine from scenes in films like Alien. It has never been clearly depicted as either a mammal or a reptile. Witnesses, however, report that it looks strikingly similar to a human being, though with grotesque bodily disproportions, most notably its mouth. According to some studies of the phenomenon, its mouth is believed to serve as a method of reproduction, and its primary means of interacting with the outside world is through its upper digestive system. Some claim to have been inoculated by this creature, describing how an enormous mouth expelled a violently aggressive larval parasite that forced its way into the victim's esophagus. While skeptics suspect these accounts may be nothing more than hallucinations tied to primal fears of consumption and hunger, similar to the themes Sigmund Freud explored in his theories on the psychic significance of the mouth, there are a handful of cases that challenge that explanation. Two such cases were studied by the Eithan Harel Foundation in a temporary camp in the state of Wyoming during the 2000s. Researchers reportedly discovered within the intestines of two individuals parasitic larvae that were unclassified by official taxonomy. Remarkably, these did not cause the victims any apparent pain, only producing a slight swelling in the abdomen. This anomaly has been attributed to certain anesthetic properties in the mucus secreted by the larvae, which also appeared to suppress other digestive functions in the hosts. It is suspected that the larva could eventually consume its host entirely and, upon reaching the ability to devour the spinal column, incorporate part of the host's skeletal structure to evolve into the supposed final form of the rake. Although it seems to undergo physiological development and displays nutritional needs while in its larval phase, once it reaches adulthood, it is said to no longer require food. Instead, it allegedly sustains itself on the molecules released by humans when adrenaline surges during episodes of extreme terror. It is unclear whether this creature can be eradicated. Although there are a few alleged filmed sightings where firearms were used, the rake seems to be shielded by its extraordinary agility, speed, and superhuman strength. No official guidelines exist on how to defend against it, but the general advice is to avoid areas where the creature is believed to dwell, typically wooded regions with hills or mountains. While its territory and range appear to be limited, reports have placed sightings in Eastern Europe, the east and west coasts of the United States, the densely forested regions of Canada, and a single account in the Amazon basin of Brazil. The earliest testimony of the rake's existence dates back to a sailor's journal from 1691. The writer described a semi-human figure that emerged from the slave hold after a week at sea, which he referred to as rake, without any further explanation. Later, in 1857, historical documents from Mississippi mention a creature attacking livestock, also called the rake. It was described as a massive dog-like beast with hollow black eyes and a terrifying demeanor, at times resembling a sickly tall man. In 1964, a case in Greece involved a man who took his own life, leaving behind a note describing a figure he called the rake, which pursued him at night and vanished only in his dreams. The most detailed modern account, certified by the Department of Biology and Archaeology at the University of Turin, comes from the transcript of a psychiatric session with a woman who claimed to have seen the creature. She described it as tall, naked, extremely pale, humanoid yet sickly in appearance, standing inside her bathroom. According to her, the terror she felt escalated into a crushing sense of hopelessness that drove her to attack her husband with a knife, convinced there was no longer any reason to live. Though he managed to disarm her and remove her from the house, he later reported experiencing the same disturbing thoughts after seeing the figure move from the bathroom into their bedroom, where it disappeared and was never seen again. Latin America is where the figure of the rake has gained particular notoriety within the popular imagination, becoming one of the region's most widespread urban legends. In Brazil, especially in areas bordering the dense Amazon, recurring reports describe a humanoid entity with unnaturally elongated proportions and disturbingly agile movements. Testimonies agree that this figure often intrudes upon rural communities, creating an atmosphere of lingering fear among residents. One of the most frequently mentioned traits in these accounts is its apparent tendency to attack livestock, a detail that has directly tied the creature to unexplained animal losses in remote areas that are difficult to monitor. Visual documentation of this supposed creature has been abundant, especially through photographs shared both in local media and across digital platforms. However, much of this material has been dismissed by experts and enthusiasts alike due to formal inconsistencies. In many cases, the captured silhouettes do not match the canonical image of the rake, that pale, thin, exaggeratedly humanoid figure rooted in internet forums since the myth first spread. Still, the sheer volume of reports keeps public interest alive, as it raises the possibility of variants or related figures dwelling in the blurred boundary between urban life and the wilderness of the jungle. In 2005, the well-known Eithan Harel Foundation requested permission to intervene in the state of Pernambuco, Brazil, following a wave of sightings of the creature. However, the government at the time, led by President da Silva, rejected any Israeli involvement on Brazilian soil. This refusal sparked one of the earliest and least known diplomatic disputes between the two nations. In February 1999, an emergency call mobilized the Tel Aviv Fire Department to the corporate headquarters of the company after a blaze broke out on one of the building's upper floors. Despite the company's initial attempts to keep the incident from becoming public, their efforts at concealment quickly failed. The scale of the event, coupled with the visible presence of emergency crews in the heart of the city's financial district, swiftly drew the attention of the local press. Once the fire was extinguished, persistent media pressure for concrete information forced the executives to admit, though only partially, that the event had not been a random accident, but rather the result of a series of structural irregularities that had been developing for several years. According to internal records, the first signs of deterioration had already appeared in 1996. Deep cracks formed along walls and columns without any apparent cause, accompanied by dark stains that slowly spread across the concrete. Maintenance reports described the damage as having an unknown origin, impossible to attribute to ordinary factors such as humidity, construction flaws, or seismic activity. Despite repeated warnings from outside engineers to carry out a full structural assessment, the company's management chose to downplay the reports and continue daily operations. The phenomenon became a routine inconvenience, noticeable but not urgent, until the fire of 1999 forced an official intervention. As media attention intensified, the Eithan Harel Foundation, an organization with ties to Israeli security agencies, stepped in and pushed for a thorough investigation of the building. Public access was restricted, and a security perimeter was established around the premises. Teams of structural experts and specialized technicians began an exhaustive survey of the damage. It was during this inspection phase that investigators uncovered an anomaly of particular interest. Along the vertical axis of one of the elevators, known as the elevator shaft, they found cracks not only compromising the inner walls of the duct, but also extending toward a hollow space that did not appear in the building's original blueprints. The discovery left the inspectors stunned. The hollow space, resembling a rocky formation, did not match any of the materials used in the building's construction. According to initial measurements, it was a natural cavity that extended several meters toward what should have been the outer facade, yet it opened onto no recognizable point. When technicians explored the passage using cameras and light sensors, they reported an unexpected structure, an architectural space that replicated, imprecisely but with eerily familiar accuracy, the internal layout of the actual building. This subterranean replica was shrouded in complete darkness, with corridors and offices that appeared as distorted imitations of the originals. During the first explorations of the area discovered behind the elevator wall, investigators described an environment in an advanced state of decay. The corridors and offices showed severe structural damage, corroded furniture, exposed wiring, and fragments of material fallen from the ceiling. There was no trace of natural light. Unlike the real building, where sunlight entered through the windows, this alternate space seemed to have no exterior at all. Beyond the glass panes stretched a dense, opaque darkness that defied both time and the cycle of day and night. Technicians noted that even external light sources could not penetrate it, as though an impenetrable layer enveloped the entire structure. At irregular intervals, a few fluorescent fixtures attached to the ceiling or walls flickered on for brief moments, casting a faint greenish glow that allowed limited passage through certain sections. Strangely, this occurred despite the near-total collapse of the electrical system. The interior, though visually disturbing, showed no immediate signs of physical or biological threat. Still, the spatial irregularities detected were deeply unsettling. The alternate building appeared to have more floors than the original structure in Tel Aviv. Staircases that should have led to upper levels instead ended in the same hallways, duplicated over and over, creating the sensation of moving through a spatial loop. In several instances, investigators reported descending or climbing multiple stories only to return, without any clear explanation, to their original position. These anomalies were carefully documented in the Eithan Harel Foundation's reports, which soon began developing various hypotheses about the true nature of the site. One of the most debated theories within the foundation suggested that this structure might exist within a kind of structural void of reality itself. From that perspective, the access point discovered within the elevator shaft functioned as a point of contact between the physical building and a liminal zone, an area where spatial and material laws no longer conform to the usual framework of physics. Some of the more speculative researchers proposed that the darkness visible through the windows did not belong to any real external environment, but rather to an artificial static layer designed to mask a profound distortion in the fabric of the universe. According to that hypothesis, the visible world of the alternate building was nothing more than a facade sustained by a fundamental void. Unlike other sites investigated by the Harel Foundation, this one was remarkable for its unusual stillness. From the outside, the place emitted no sound whatsoever, while inside, an absolute silence prevailed, interrupted only by a faint echo that accompanied every movement or word. The building's enclosed acoustics caused sounds to propagate evenly, repeating themselves with a subtle resonance that made their source difficult to locate. Occasionally, teams reported the sound of pipes or metallic vibrations coming from unidentified areas. However, despite numerous attempts to trace them, the exact points of origin were never found. From a geometric standpoint, the space was relatively stable compared to other anomalies studied by the Foundation. Its internal proportions generally followed a Euclidean pattern, allowing researchers to move in straight lines without immediate disorientation. This characteristic facilitated exploration and mapping, provided the teams avoided changing routes between floors. Over the following years, the Harel Foundation conducted at least 4 additional incursions, all through the same elevator opening, without recording any incidents or complications during entry or exit. According to estimates from the most recent reports, the site's total extension was roughly equivalent to the combined volume of 3 8-story buildings, similar in size and design to an average corporate complex in Tel Aviv. Although smaller in scale than other known anomalies, this site stood out for the consistency of its structure and the absence of hostile or unstable behavior, which allowed it to be documented in greater detail than most spaces of its kind. At present, the company's internal clauses enforce an international prohibition against disclosing the site's exact location. In 2007, its total demolition was ordered and a new complex, visibly similar in facade but largely unnoticed, was built in its place. It is suspected that the Mossad, in collaboration with the Harel Foundation, continues to conduct weapons research within this parallel zone, which, despite being housed in a new building, is believed to persist due to the gravitational forces sustaining the survival of the temporomagnetic aberration. At present, the precise location of that building remains strictly classified, protected under international confidentiality agreements signed between the company, the Israeli authorities, and various security agencies. One of the most recognized entities within the narrative universe of the SCP Foundation is the one commonly referred to as the statue. It is a humanoid figure built from simple industrial materials, reinforced concrete with rebar and a coat of Krylon spray paint. Despite its crude construction, its appearance carries an imposing presence and an unsettling sense of physicality. Yet, what has made it an icon within the Foundation's fictional archives is not its form or texture, but the anomalous properties attributed to it. The statue is said to move at extreme speeds and to kill its victims by snapping their cervical vertebrae with a force no known organism could possibly exert. Its most distinctive, and at the same time most intriguing, trait is its complete immobility while under direct observation. As long as there is an unbroken line of sight between the statue and an observer, it remains utterly still, as if devoid of reaction or intent. However, the moment that visual contact is interrupted, even for an instant, the figure seems to come alive. It can then reappear in a different position, often just a few feet from where it was, though in some recorded cases it appears to move so fast that the distance covered defies all known physical limits. Security footage linked to the alleged incidents shows abrupt, erratic motion, more like dragging than articulated movement, contributing to the sense that this is a being that violates biomechanical logic and the very laws of inertia. Despite the structural simplicity of the myth compared with other stories in the CSV canon, the statue has maintained a peculiar prominence due to the mystery surrounding its origin. Officially, the documents within the narrative offer almost no details about its creation or provenance, yet various community reinterpretations and complementary theories have proposed a historical starting point. According to one of the most widespread versions, the earliest reference to this entity may date back to 2002 in Saudi Arabia, where a case reportedly occurred bearing striking similarities to later descriptions of the object. That episode is said to have remained secret for more than a decade, allegedly under the custody of local authorities and completely absent from media coverage. According to rumors circulating among followers and archivists of SCP mythology, the alleged involvement of United States and Israeli agencies ultimately led to the dismantling of what was later described as a vast human trafficking network. In 1998, an incident occurred that initially drew little attention outside diplomatic and intelligence circles, but over time revealed deeply unsettling dimensions. 5 Israeli tourists, all holding United States passports, vanished after an unexpectedly long stopover in Saudi Arabia during a flight bound for Japan. The layover, lasting nearly 10 hours, did not correspond to the usual route for that itinerary, which immediately raised suspicion. From that moment on, the travelers became untraceable. No records in airports, hotels, or immigration checkpoints were ever found. The Harel Foundation, to which I've devoted entire videos, decided to follow the case closely. Although there were no signs suggesting that the disappearance was tied to any supernatural or irrational event, the irregularity of the situation and the subsequent silence of local authorities caught the attention of its researchers. What began as a simple data-gathering effort gradually turned into an investigation that stretched on for years. Through contacts across various Middle Eastern countries, the inquiries began to outline a pattern of discrete movements throughout the vast Arabian desert, particularly in its southwestern region near the Yemeni border. Reports mention nocturnal caravans, hidden facilities, and an unusual flow of goods with no commercial record. This cluster of signs prompted Israeli authorities to launch a covert investigation, relying on intelligence operations and on-the-ground reconnaissance, all under strict state secrecy. The outcome of that operation proved far more severe than anyone involved had anticipated. Amid a desolate and seemingly barren landscape, authorities uncovered a network of underground facilities that, as later estimated, had been operating for decades for the purpose of human trafficking. Inside massive storage halls carved beneath the sand, connected by an intricate system of tunnels and chambers, nearly 200 people were found in extreme conditions, many of them malnourished, disoriented, and in a state of shock. The victims had been held with the intent of being trafficked to various regions across the Middle East and, in some cases, to even more distant destinations in sub-Saharan Africa. However, beyond the humanitarian impact and the immediate horror sparked by the discovery of those underground structures, an element emerged that unsettled even the most seasoned agents and analysts. Among the testimonies gathered from the freed prisoners, a repeated reference appeared, accounts of figures they called the sculpture. The consistency of these descriptions, despite coming from people who neither knew one another nor shared a common language, drew the investigators' attention. According to the survivors, the mere presence of these figures inspired absolute terror within the compound, fear that went far beyond any rational or psychological explanation tied to captivity. Over time, through audiovisual and photographic records seized during the arrests, it was confirmed that several of these figures did indeed exist. Their appearance vaguely resembled that of a crude concrete doll, with roughly defined human features and an uneven coloration, as if they had been hastily molded without any aesthetic intent. Nothing in their appearance seemed to justify the terror they provoked, and yet, for the prisoners, those sculptures embodied the most dreaded moments of their days underground. The accounts agreed that, from time to time, the guards forced them to witness the appearance of these figures. In some cases, they claimed to have seen them move with a speed impossible to perceive with the naked eye, defying every physical notion of movement. The results, according to their statements, were devastating. Some prisoners swore that the sculptures would appear inside the bodies of their victims, causing inexplicable internal injuries and prolonged suffering that could last for hours before death. None of the available recordings ever conclusively confirmed these phenomena, though several showed incoherent, distorted sequences in which the figure appeared in different positions between consecutive frames, without any visible movement in between. When the Harel Foundation gained access to these materials and the testimonies associated with them, it decided to intervene. With logistical support from the Israeli state, the figures were transported to Tel Aviv under strict containment protocols, housed in specially prepared facilities for study. For years they remained in storage, subjected to periodic analysis with no major incidents ever reported. Their existence never reached the public eye, and all reports concerning them were classified as restricted material. However, as time passed and the conflict in the occupied territories grew more intense, fragments of information began to surface, sparking renewed suspicion. Various sources, including leaked documents and testimonies from former agents, claimed that the Harel Foundation had resumed involvement in unofficial military operations, allegedly deploying the so-called monoliths in locations where the majority of massacres had taken place. Clandestinely released images appeared to show structures resembling the sculptures found in the Saudi desert, moving through ruins and devastated zones. Although the authenticity of these recordings has never been confirmed, their mere existence has been enough to reignite speculation about the fate of those enigmatic figures and about the role the Harel Foundation may now be playing within the context of the ongoing conflict. One of the most persistent obsessions in the career of Eithan Harel, founder of the foundation that bears his name and dedicated to the analysis and containment of anomalous phenomena in different parts of the world, was the exploration of the human psyche. Harel, known for his interdisciplinary curiosity, did not confine himself to empirical studies or conventional clinical observation. In the 1960s, he attended several lectures by the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, with whom he even shared a few personal conversations. From those encounters, he absorbed notions that would profoundly shape his intellectual pursuits, particularly the idea of the real as an elusive dimension of human experience. For Harel, this contact with Lacan was not a mere intellectual exercise, but the starting point of a systematic interest in the mechanisms that govern the mind and social behavior. That interest would later lead him to focus on a phenomenon that defied conventional explanations of mental health and collective behavior. The setting was Harney County, a county in the state of Oregon in the United States. Harel had received reports indicating that this community displayed conditions that did not align with the usual patterns of modern societies. Mental health rates in the region were extraordinarily high, to the point where the work performance of nearly all employees reached remarkably outstanding levels. In the schools, children not only met the expected standards but statistically ranked as the best in the region on academic achievement tests. Even more striking was that, for roughly 4 decades, the community had experienced no major conflicts requiring police intervention. The singular nature of this situation aroused in Harel the suspicion that it was not merely a set of coincidences or isolated socioeconomic factors, but rather a phenomenon that demanded rigorous examination. The prolonged absence of incidents disrupting social harmony, combined with consistently positive indicators across every area of community development, presented a case that exceeded the expectations of even the most prosperous societies. In 1989, the Harel Foundation decided to organize a delegation to investigate firsthand what was happening in Harney County. The goal was not only to gather statistics, but to establish direct contact with the inhabitants of the county's main towns. The plan involved conducting interviews with workers, educators, local officials, and entire families in order to build as complete a picture as possible of daily life in the region and of the potential causes behind such unusual stability. What the Harel Foundation team discovered in Harney County proved to be as extraordinary as it was unexpected. Owing to the county's low population density and its isolation from the major cities of the Pacific Coast, it was not surprising that such a phenomenon had escaped public attention. What at first glance appeared to be a cluster of quiet, unremarkable communities, in fact, concealed an element that profoundly transformed the lives of their residents. Upon entering the homes in the various towns, the investigators noted a recurring pattern. Inside most houses, there was a strange substance, an amorphous, gelatinous mass of orange hue that in some cases appeared translucent and in others took on a denser consistency. Its texture was extremely malleable, easily deforming, and it displayed no signs of hostility upon contact with humans. This substance was distributed without any apparent order, appearing in corners, on walls, ceilings, and even across furniture, creating an omnipresent presence within the homes. The team collected samples and, after subjecting them to preliminary laboratory analysis, determined that its elastic properties were highly unusual. The mass could expand to nearly 6 times its original size before returning to its previous form. It was a material whose molecular structure suggested a synthetic origin, yet there was no record of its industrial production nor any clear explanation for its presence in that place. Another remarkable property was its selective, hydrophobic behavior, which did not follow any regular or predictable pattern. It could easily consume metallic surfaces, progressively altering their composition, but displayed a marked aversion to common plastic, on which it had no observable effect. When interviewing the inhabitants of the region, the investigators found that the prevailing perception of this mass was surprisingly positive. Residents insisted that its presence not only posed no danger, but was a source of well-being. They described it as entirely benign, associating it with a constant state of joy that settled over those who lived alongside it. Most striking of all was that, when asked about the substance's origin, few could offer a concrete answer. Some claimed it had been there since before their grandparents were born, implying a presence stretching back at least several generations. Testimonies included direct references to substantial improvements in the mental health of those exposed to the mass. Entire families recounted how relatives who had suffered depressive episodes were invited to stay in homes where the substance was present, and after living with it, they achieved a complete recovery, so much so that they became highly functional individuals, and, in many cases, remarkably successful in both their personal and professional lives. The most widely accepted explanation among the researchers was that the mass released chemical compounds, which, when inhaled or absorbed through direct contact with the skin, produced alterations in human neurotransmitters. In this way, brain processes reached an optimal state of functioning, which translated into high levels of emotional well-being, enhanced cognitive abilities, and extraordinary physical and mental performance. Nevertheless, despite extensive testing, the studies devoted to understanding the gelatinous mass failed to produce definitive conclusions. Its exact biochemical mechanism remained indecipherable. It was evident that it played a measurable role in improving the human condition, yet it was impossible to determine precisely how it achieved this. The enigma quickly attracted the attention of groups outside the scientific community. Prominent business leaders, both American and European, approached the Harel Foundation with the intention of acquiring the substance or replicating its properties, offering multi-million-dollar sums with the promise of applying it in the workplace to artificially boost employee productivity. Faced with such proposals, Harel stood firm. He politely declined all offers, keeping the phenomenon under the custody of his foundation and preventing it from becoming an object of economic exploitation. The exact reasons why Eithan Harel rejected the immense financial offers made by major international corporations eager to seize the mysterious substance discovered in Harney County were never known. However, there exists a written testimony that sheds some light on his thinking during the final years of his life. It is a letter addressed to Thibaut Lacan, son of the renowned psychoanalyst, drafted just a few weeks before Harel's death. In that letter, Harel recalled the intellectual influence of Jacques Lacan and the persistence of his ideas in shaping his understanding of the world. He openly admitted that Jacques' discoveries never ceased to amaze me, and argued that the concept of the real was present in everything observable, beyond the ordinary categories of comprehension. For Harel, this dimension was not merely a theoretical construct, but a tangible presence, unsettling and in many respects, terrifying. In his view, Lacan had sought to share this knowledge, though deliberately in veiled form, reserving full comprehension only for those capable of perceiving its scope and assuming the responsibility of engaging with it. The letter suggested that, in Harel's vision, the task of those who had grasped the Lacanian message was to identify and neutralize manifestations of the real that slipped into the everyday fabric of the world, accessible even accidentally to individuals whose intentions might be harmful. Within that context, Harel mentioned Jacques-Alain Miller with marked distrust, describing him as a persistent obstacle to the work of his foundation. In his words, Miller had done nothing but hinder the research and preservation efforts surrounding phenomena such as the one discovered in Oregon, and he warned that Miller would likely continue to do so even after his death. Throughout modern history, countless conspiracy theories have captured the public's attention. Classic examples include the speculations surrounding the assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the September 11th attacks in New York, the alleged secrets of Area 51 in Nevada, or the alternative accounts of Operation Valkyrie during the time of the Third Reich. Within this broad landscape of conspiratorial narratives lies a particular thread that links the Eithan Harel Foundation to the well-known SCP Foundation, the popular collaborative fiction project on the internet that catalogs anomalous phenomena and objects. The Cypriot Israeli physicist Eithan Harel, central to this theory, devoted his life to a series of investigations and experiments that, according to some, were later mistaken for what are now called SCPs. What appears in the online community as fantastic tales, framed in the style of classified top-secret files, would, for others, be nothing more than a stylized recreation of events with a factual basis. According to these versions, the SCP Foundation would function as a kind of cultural mask, a narrative stage where authentic incidents were reshaped into fiction, thereby concealing events whose existence would be too troubling to acknowledge. Harel's work has been documented on multiple occasions, and according to testimonies gathered from various sources, it is believed to remain under the supervision of Israeli state agencies. This control, however, has not silenced the alternative interpretations circulating within specialized circles. Some maintain that the Harel Foundation itself, together with its founder, may have served as instruments of broader interests, backed by business networks and influence groups that are difficult to identify. Although the identity of these structures cannot be clearly established, it is said they have left subtle traces, signals that, for those who study the subject, point to their indirect involvement in shaping the course of events. Within this framework, the use of SCP fiction is seen as a strategic resource, allegedly set in motion by the Harel Foundation almost by accident. By wrapping the record of anomalies in a recognizable cultural format, it stripped away the immediate gravity of matters that might otherwise have been perceived as genuine threats. Yet, beyond that surface layer of storytelling, the Harel Foundation is thought to have functioned as a global hub of experimentation. This was not merely scientific observation, but multinational trials that at times involved specific human populations and environments. According to this interpretation, these experiments aimed to anticipate technological or industrial developments that years later would come to dominate the global market, disregarding both ethical boundaries and international conventions related to human rights. Some of the more speculative accounts suggest that Eithan Harel himself, despite his undeniable scientific talent, may have been manipulated by outside forces. His inclination toward religious and mystical perspectives would have made it easier for more powerful actors to steer him toward goals that were not strictly academic. In this way, through his bias toward transcendental beliefs, he may have been led to overlook the transgressive nature of the phenomena he studied. Within this narrative, it is claimed that the forces said to have manipulated Harel and his foundation originated in an intellectual and business circle connected to Yale University during the early decades of the 20th century. From that core, according to these accounts, a network of experimentation and control was built, one that, under different faces and strategies, continues to exert influence to this day. The theory does not portray these groups as entities interested in the supernatural, but rather as focused on very concrete processes of domination and the management of knowledge. According to the conspiracy, the true objective was not to investigate or uncover genuinely anomalous mysteries, but to develop mechanisms of control capable of presenting extraordinary events as though they were legitimate scientific phenomena. This would allow qualified individuals to study, classify, and reinterpret such occurrences before filtering them to the public in the form of fictionalized accounts, such as those found within the SCP Foundation. However, from this perspective, those supposed anomalies would be nothing more than special effects generated by advanced, restricted technologies, designed to sustain narratives that serve power and to keep populations confined within a framework of obedience and acceptance. Within this logic, even hypotheses pointing to extraterrestrial beings, ancient gods, or extra-dimensional presences would be part of the same design. It would amount to a deliberate strategy to cultivate beliefs that divert attention from the real mechanisms of power and technology operating behind the scenes. According to this view, there is in fact no mystical or magical intervention in the human world. The events presented as such would be the handiwork of men and women wielding extraordinary influence and economic power. The resulting hierarchical structure, comparable to natural dynamics of domination in various systems, would allow this elite to control humanity through rational and predictable methods, appealing both to the most basic desires and to the wildest fantasies of the population. These in turn would serve as instruments for shaping collective perceptions and behaviors.